From the perspective of the world, just about everybody in our readings today should seem crazy. Let's start with Zephaniah. We only hear from him on Sundays twice in our 3-year cycle, so it's a rare treat. Zephaniah prophesied towards the end of the kingdom of Judah, and most of his 3 short chapters are not too optimistic. In the first 2 chapters, Zephaniah writes, "A day of wrath is that day, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of thick black clouds." But then he ends with what we heard today. "Shout for joy, sing joyfully, be glad and exult with all your heart." Now, some of this sudden shift is explained by the fact that Zephaniah is prophesying first a destruction and then a restoration and a salvation, but it is still a jarring transition for so short a book. Next we have Paul. Paul doubles down on Zephaniah's rejoicing. "Rejoice in the Lord always, I shall say it again, rejoice." And once again, we should be aware of what came right before this. At the start of his letter to the Philippians, Paul mentions not only that he is in prison while writing this letter, but that he's not too sure that he'll get out alive. And yet he is the one encouraging the Philippians to rejoice and to have no anxieties at all. And then we have our gospel. We already know that John the Baptist can seem crazy, what with camel hair clothes and diets of locusts and honey. But here on Gaudete Sunday, Rejoice Sunday, John first encourages virtue and selflessness. He does his job pointing to the Christ. And then when he's talking about Christ's baptism, he adds, "His winnowing fan is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." And then after this explosive and vivid image, Luke concludes, exhorting them in many other ways, he preached good news to the people. Apparently this met Luke's definition of good news. And in the very next verse after our gospel ends, Herod threw John the Baptist in prison for his preaching. In all 3 of these readings, we see those who seem to have every reason not to rejoice. And yet, in all of them, there is a joy that is almost tangible, radiating through the centuries. Despite all of the messiness of their situations, there is this supernatural joy that shines through undimmed. They are not blind to the darkness that they faced, or totally unaffected by it, but they have a joy that cannot be taken away from them, no matter what they face in the world. Let's contrast this with another kind of joy. The world knows that we are supposed to be rejoicing this time of year, and sometimes tries to force this joy by diving headlong into the externals of the season. And while there are many moments of genuine joy to be found in and amongst the trappings of our Christmas celebrations, it is not a lasting or a fulfilling joy. This kind of joy is often easily threatened when there are tensions within the family, or disappointment in who can or how we can gather due to global events or personal tragedies, or just the normal anxieties of pulling off the perfect holidays. So these external signs, food, song, decorations, are too often how we try to cover over any anxieties, at least until December 26th. They become a thin coating of snow that will soon be grimy and icy, instead of a radiant and undimmed light. So why does the church give us these uniquely joyful readings and people on this Rejoice Sunday? It's because I think we need to be reminded that, as St. Teresa of Avila put it, "From sour-faced saints, good Lord, deliver us." That following Christ's message is not about surrendering all joy, embracing a life of misery, and banking everything on future joy. It is about seeking the true source of joy even now, instead of settling for poor imitations. Here's a more recent example. Blessed Chiara Badano was born in 1971 in Italy. She loved singing and dancing and playing tennis, but God most of all. As a teenager, she was diagnosed with a particularly painful form of bone cancer. And as she was dying in the hospital, many people from her life came to visit her, hoping that they might be able to cheer her up, to do something for her, or somehow to make her feel better. But to their surprise, she inevitably cheered them up. They would leave not having spread a little joy to Chiara, but having themselves caught a little of her joy. So how could this teenager be so full of joy on her deathbed? It's the same way that Zephaniah could end his prophecy with joy, and the same way that Paul could radiate joy from prison. This time of year, we're given plenty of reminders to rejoice. So amidst all the gatherings, caroling, and presents, and especially when we feel that our joy is threatened, I think we need Paul's words with a slight shift in emphasis. Rejoice in the Lord always. I shall say it again, in the Lord. If our joy is in the things of the world, then it will be neither lasting nor truly satisfying. But if we rest our joy in God, then no anxieties of the world can destroy it, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus.